Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Monday, 11th August 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China is navigating a complex economic and technological landscape, exemplified by Huawei Technology's efforts to reduce reliance on foreign high-bandwidth memory, HBM chips, through potential technological advancements. Economist Wang Yiming notes the government is carefully balancing regulation and innovation in the rapidly expanding instant retail e-commerce market. Contemporary Amperex technologies, cattle, lithium, mine production, suspension underscores Beijing's concerns about overcapacity in the EV battery sector, even as EV sales experienced a dip in July, raising questions about industry growth. Huawei Technology CEO Ren Zhengfei is advising Chang'an Automobile on its global expansion. Agibot, a Chinese robotics startup, secured an order from Fuel & Precision to deploy nearly 100 robots. The country is actively promoting the international adoption of its currency. Australian metals giant Fortescue secured a 14.2 billion yuan, $1.98 billion syndicated loan, arranged by Bank of China. Ships transporting Chinese electric cars continue to use the Red Sea and Suez Canal, despite attacks by Houthi militia. In an attempt to stabilize housing prices, analysts suggest Shanghai and Shenzhen could follow Beijing's lead by easing home purchase restrictions in outlying areas. Stocks opened sharply lower on the first trading day of the Lunar New Year, while China and Hong Kong accounted for 1/3 of IPO proceeds in the first half of 2025. 30-year yields have risen to a 4-month high amid trade optimism. Turning to United States, China trade relations, the 90-day pause on imposing higher tariffs on China is approaching its expiration date, with the possibility of an extension still uncertain. President Donald Trump previously extended a tariff truce with China for 3 months, continuing a reprieve from escalating tariffs and export controls. And this extension spurred a market rally. Pension funds anticipate a further extension rather than a final deal. Furthermore, President Trump stated he personally negotiated a deal allowing Nvidia to sell lower-end chips to China in exchange for the U.S. government receiving 15% of the sales revenue. Nvidia and AMD are reportedly to pay 15% of China chip sales revenues to the U.S. government due to these tariffs. However, China is urging firms not to use Nvidia H20 chips in new guidance. A former U.S. trade representative for China suggested there would be additional tariff extensions at least until a summit date. In Southeast Asia, China is expanding its influence through port expansion projects, including a major port upgrade in Brunei. Saudi Arabia's economic landscape is marked by expansion in technology, healthcare, and construction, with industrial production hitting its highest mark since 2022. The Saudi government is weighing a tax waiver for its sovereign wealth fund and tax relief for limited liability partnerships, LPS. Concurrently, the Saudi stock market is exploring avenues to welcome global investors, although the Tadawul All-Share Index recently closed lower by 0.99%. The solar energy sector in Saudi Arabia is poised for substantial growth. In the realm of finance, Saudi Arabia will permit investment funds to be listed on the Tadawul and Nomo exchanges. The kingdom spearheaded EPO activity in the Middle East and North Africa, MENA, during the second quarter, amassing $1.90 billion of the total $2 billion. The Saudi Electricity Company announced a 22% increase in net profit for Q2 2025, with revenue reaching $7.30 billion. Bank Albilad is partnering with Intellect Design Arena to modernize its cash management services. However, Alujayan Corporation reported net losses in the first half of 2025. Real estate developer Dow Global is embarking on a $12.50 billion expansion plan that includes significant projects in Saudi Arabia, bolstered financing, and a launch within the Dubai International Financial Center. Dow Global's gross development value, GDV, has surged by 67% to $12.50 billion. Expro accomplished its inaugural fully remote 5-plug cementing operation within Saudi Arabia. The nation is expediting the integration of autonomous vehicles. Saudi Arabia is also engaging with advisors to assess the viability of the Line project. Looking ahead, crude oil supply from Saudi Arabia to China is projected to decline in September. United States. Donald Trump's trade policies continue to reverberate through the global economy. He extended the U.S.-China tariff truce by 90 days, citing China's progress in trade commitments. However, he also announced a 100% tariff on semiconductor and chip import. Nvidia and AMD may be required to pay the U.S. 15% of their China AI chip sales, as part of a deal brokered by Trump. These tariffs have raised concerns about their potential impact on small U.S. companies. Trump also threatened to impose 50% tariffs on Indian oil imports from Russia, a move seen as a potential blow to Moscow. Furthermore, his administration considered tariffs on Barrick Mining, potentially impacting their $3.50 billion copper project in Pakistan. News of a planned Putin-Trump summit in Alaska led to a surge in the Russian stock market. US stocks experienced a downturn, and US yields fell as markets anticipated developments in trade and geopolitics. Russia. The Russian stock market responded positively to news of a potential Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, rising to a 3-month high. Raiffeisen's Russian unit reported a home profit increase to $1.05 billion. Rising mortgage costs, however, have put 1 in 5 Russian developers at risk of bankruptcy. Moscow faced drone attacks, with Russian forces reportedly downing 7 drones targeting the capital. Amidst geopolitical tensions, Russia responded to Trump's nuclear submarine movements. President Putin and Armenian PM Pashinyan discussed those meetings via phone. Russia and Ukraine maintained their demands ahead of the planned Putin-Trump summit. Foreign actors are set to undergo training in Russian theater practices in Moscow. Ukraine remains entangled in ongoing geopolitical tensions with Russia, holding firm to its demands ahead of a planned Putin-Trump summit. President Zelensky sought support from India's Modi, addressing concerns about restricted oil flows from Russia. Zelensky and Modi are planning a meeting in September. India's relationship with Russia is facing potential disruption due to threatened US tariffs on oil imports from Russia. President Zelensky is seeking India's support, addressing concerns about restricted oil flows from Russia. Zelensky and Modi are planning a meeting in September. China remains a central player in ongoing trade discussions with the U.S., including a 90-day tariff truce extension. US companies Nvidia and AMD may be required to pay the U.S. 15% of China AI chip sales in a deal brokered by Trump. Pakistan. Barrick Mining's $3.50 billion copper project in Pakistan faces potential disruption due to potential U.S. tariffs. Indian stock markets displayed a mixed trend, as gains in it stocks were offset by losses in the financial sector. This was partly driven by investors awaiting the release of CPI data from both the US and India. The Nifty 50 index closed with a rise of 0.91%, while the Sensex surged 750 points, finishing above 24,000 550. Huawei infrastructure shares made a strong debut, listing at a premium of 67%. The IPO of JSW Cement was fully subscribed by its third day. Domestic institutional investors, DIIs, now hold a larger share of the Indian market than foreign institutional investors, VICs, marking a shift not seen in 2 decades. GIFT Nifty trends indicate a potentially muted opening for the Indian benchmark index. Analysts are recommending a buy-on-dip strategy, encouraged by healthy domestic investment trends. Motilal Oswal is specifically recommending buying stocks in India's wind sector. LPL Financial LLC sold shares of the Columbia India Consumer ETF Nizierka Inco. Stocks to watch include Hindalco, ICL, Bata India, and Astral. Trade negotiations between India and the United States broke down, resulting in the U.S. imposing a 50% tariff on Indian goods, thus escalating trade tensions. The Reserve Bank of India, RBI, reportedly sold at least $5 billion in an effort to strengthen the rupee. According to remarks made by President Trump ahead of talks in Alaska, tariffs on India's oil imports are a major blow to Moscow. President Zelensky has urged India to limit Russian energy exports, a request to which Prime Minister Modi responded. There is growing interest in domestic investment, market activity, government initiatives, and growth prospects in India. Concerns have also been voiced regarding the potential for foreign powers to control India's digital infrastructure through undersea cable. United States. Following the breakdown of trade negotiations between India and the United States, the U.S. implemented a 50% tariff on Indian goods. President Trump also commented that tariffs on India's oil imports would significantly impact Moscow. Furthermore, Trump signed a China tariff extension, specifically clarifying that gold imports would not be subject to these duties. United Kingdom. The UK stock market experienced an upswing, with the investing.com United Kingdom 100 index increasing by 0.35%. Financial stocks were the primary drivers of this rise on the FTSE 100. However, the UK job market is exhibiting indications of softening, evidenced by a decline in vacancies. In the financial sector, 7 UK local authority pension funds are consolidating their assets under a single larger manager. Despite Chancellor Rachel Reeves' efforts to support the sector, investment in UK fintech companies has seen a decrease. UK investors are increasingly looking at emerging markets for investment opportunities. A company in the Northeast has broadened its operations through the acquisition of a London-based firm. The consolidation of UK real estate investment trusts, REITs, is creating more efficient mandates for investors, although it reduces options for those wishing to avoid governance risks. The pound remained stable in anticipation of the release of UK jobs data. Ukraine. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine continues to be a major point of concern in Europe. Discussions about the situation in Ukraine are still in progress. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has shared some details regarding a recent meeting with Vladimir Putin, which included discussions about the conflict. The international community is closely monitoring developments as Ukraine seeks continued support and defense against ongoing Russian aggression. United States-China trade. The upcoming court decision regarding the authority of former President Trump to impose tariffs continues to be a key issue, with significant potential consequences for trade relations between the United States and China. The ruling could reshape the landscape of international trade and economic policy. Inter-American Development Bank. The Inter-American Development Bank has issued £50 million in notes, contributing to its financial operations and development initiatives in the Americas. Australia's Reserve Bank lowered its benchmark interest rate to 3.6%, the lowest since April 2023, cutting rates for the third time this year amidst tamed inflation and sluggish economic growth. This spurred the Australian stock market to a record high, with the ASX 200 experiencing a notable boost. Star, an Australian casino operator, is reportedly reviving plans to sell a 50% stake in its assets to Hong Kong investors. Meanwhile, Spark is divesting 75% of its data center business to an Australian firm in a deal valued at up to $584 million. Attention is also focused on iron ore miners, given Chinese steel mills halting production and the US-China tariff truce extension. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung will meet with US President Donald Trump on August 25 in Washington. Discussions will focus on trade and defense cooperation, given persistent concerns regarding North Korea. Economically, foreign investors have invested $4.80 billion in South Korean stocks and bonds over the last 3 months. Short-selling investments have significantly increased alongside a rising stock market. EQT has acquired a controlling interest in Remember, which is a professional networking platform analogous to LinkedIn in the Korean market. Andurra is expanding into South Korea and collaborating with Korean Air to produce unmanned aircraft systems. US top diplomats from South Korea and Britain recently held their first phone call, focusing on bilateral relations. In law enforcement news, South Korean authorities have arrested a Pakistani Lashkar terrorist. Asian markets displayed a mixed performance, largely shaped by anticipation surrounding upcoming U.S. economic data releases, unfolding trade discussions, and the ever-present influence of U.S. President Donald Trump's trade policy. Asian shares initially wavered, awaiting the deadline for potential tariff hikes on Chinese goods. However, most markets rallied when President Trump announced a 90-day delay on further tariff increases on China, providing a welcome reprieve to investors and fueling an upward trend. Buying activity in the IT sector also boosted trading. Asian currencies held steady, also awaiting the U.S. economic data. AirAsia's parent company is considering a listing on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. This strategic move aims to broaden the airline's market presence and tap into new pools of capital. The listing would make AirAsia more accessible to investors in the region, potentially boosting its financial strength and supporting future expansion plans. European stock markets are anticipating a higher opening, influenced by the impending release of U.S. inflation data. European shares have already demonstrated gains in anticipation of U.S.-Russia talks, reflecting the market's sensitivity to geopolitical developments. European defense stocks have seen substantial growth, more than tripling in value since the beginning of the year, according to Bank of America. Simultaneously, Orsted shares experienced a notable 30% drop, illustrating the volatility present in the European market. Several European dividend stocks are offering yields as high as 6.1%. European companies are also increasingly using Hong Kong as a strategic hub for expanding their business operations in Asia, especially into mainland China. Furthermore, European leaders, along with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, are slated to hold discussions with Donald Trump this Wednesday. South Africa's rand weakened amidst ongoing tariff anxieties, despite positive manufacturing data. The nation is actively pursuing Asian markets to diversify its agricultural exports, aiming to mitigate these tariff pressures. The ferrochrome and chrome ore industries face a crucial juncture that demands strategic market maneuvering. Kumba Iron Ore is actively involved in efforts to lower carbon emissions within the global steel production industry. Johannesburg is broadening its free electricity program to encompass regions supplied by Eskom, the national power utility. A landmark restaurant in South Africa is closing its doors, signifying the end of a significant chapter. Turning to Zambia, the country is engaged in discussions regarding the effective management and strategic deployment of its newly discovered gold reserves. Japan's Nikkei stock average has reached a new record high, driven by strong investor sentiment. SoftBank Group, a prominent Japanese tech firm, is seeing its performance boosted by the surge in AI-related stocks. Masayoshi Son, the founder, is making substantial investments in artificial intelligence, positioning the company's future on this technology. Ethereum is also achieving record highs in Japan, reflecting robust local demand. Turning to Australia, financial markets are keenly watching the Reserve Bank of Australia with expectations of a potential cut to the country's cash rate. In South Korea, Ethereum is similarly experiencing record highs, fueled by substantial local demand. Canada's stock market saw a slight uptick as the S&P TAIEX Composite Index edged up by 0.06%. Macquarie Financial Group announced the renewal of its at-the-market program, signaling continued financial activity. Market observers also highlighted a preview of stocks to watch on the TAIEX, drawing investor attention. The 5 most actively traded stocks on the TAIEX last week were closely monitored, reflecting dynamic trading patterns. Singapore's Resorts World Sentosa is preparing for its critical license renewal evaluation by the Gambling Regulatory Authority in 2026, according to CEO Lee Shi-ru. Meanwhile, Singapore-based SMPT is undertaking a streamlining operation in mainland China, which includes the closure of its factory in Shenzhen and the layoff of 950 employees. Shifting to investments, a foreign institutional investor, fee-based in Singapore, has increased its stake in an Indian realty stock to 40%, investing €750 crore despite recent market volatility. Switzerland recently navigated trade tensions as U.S. Customs and Border Protection initially considered imposing tariffs on Swiss gold bars. Former President Trump intervened, stating that gold would be exempt from these tariffs. In unrelated news, an expansive family tree was unveiled within Switzerland. Despite the brief tariff uncertainty, forecasts suggest the Swiss economy will likely experience only a minor impact on its overall growth trajectory. In Angola, President João Lourenço is working to preempt potential protests arising from increases in fuel prices. Shifting to Brazil, previous restrictions imposed on big tech companies might see a shift. The imposition of tariffs by the United States under President Trump could potentially afford U.S. tech firms increased influence within the Brazilian market. Meanwhile, Glenmore Capital in Bulgaria has increased its capital by €664,677. Turning to Cambodia, hundreds of thousands of Cambodian migrant workers are returning home from Thailand due to armed clashes along their shared border, seeking a ceasefire to the conflict. In China, tensions are on the rise between Spain and the United States, as Spain challenges the U.S. on defense and China. Separately, the Philippines accused a Chinese ship of targeting one of its vessels with a water cannon. Tragically, in Colombia, a presidential hopeful has died 2 months after being shot. Denmark's government is facing political opposition to its plan to inject billions into Ørsted, a renewable energy company. In France, a French company placed a $20 million order for drones from a defense stock, causing the stock to hit its upper circuit. The Ghana Stock Exchange in Ghana has surpassed $150 billion, achieving a significant market milestone. Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto met with Peruvian President Dina Boluarte to strengthen trade and economic ties between Indonesia and Peru. In Israel, Norway's $1.90 trillion wealth fund has sold off Israeli assets. News from Israel and the Jewish world is being reported in Spanish. Japan is seeing an increase in popularity and market share for Vietnamese bananas. Norway's $1.90 trillion wealth fund has sold off Israeli assets. Over in Pakistan, the stock market is experiencing gains due to optimism surrounding trade negotiations with the United States, hailed as a landmark deal. Also, a Pakistani terrorist was found to be working in Seoul, South Korea. Peru's President Dina Boluarte met with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto to enhance trade and economic cooperation. In the Philippines, the assertion was made that a Chinese ship targeted a Philippine vessel with a water cannon. The Philippines also anticipates being drawn into any potential conflict over Taiwan, according to President Marcos. Shifting to Saudi Arabia, speculation suggests that Turkey could become a major investment hub for football, similar to Saudi Arabia's recent investments in the sport. South Korea has discovered a Pakistani terrorist working in Seoul. Spain is experiencing growing tensions with the United States over defense and foreign policy, as Spain is challenging the US on defense and China. Sri Lanka is emerging as a new destination for global investors. Taiwan is in ongoing negotiations with the United States, aiming to reduce import tariffs by 20%. Meanwhile, in Thailand, armed clashes on the border with Cambodia have led to hundreds of thousands of Cambodian migrant workers returning home. Speculation suggests that Turkey may become a major investment hub for football, following the trend set by Saudi Arabia. The United Arab Emirates saw Emirates NBD's zero-fee trading platform reach $1.40 billion in its first year. In the United States, the market for clean hydrogen fuel is still developing, facing challenges from rising costs and limitations on a lucrative tax credit imposed by Congress. A former trade official stated that extending the Trump-China trade truce demeans the United States. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.